video, the next video in the Quilters Cupboards Favorite series. I'm Noreen, and today I'm going to talk to you about the Tri-Star Table Runner pattern. This is a Quilters Cupboard own pattern. It has been a favorite around here for quite a little while, and you may have been lucky enough to already purchase one of our kits with that pattern. We are going to have the pattern available as a PDF download very soon. Up until now it was available only in our kit, so really good news coming for all of you who want to try the pattern with your own fabrics. It's a great scrappy pattern, great for lots of different fabrics. You can see behind me here we have one done in the Janet Claire Blues line. This has been very popular, and you may have been lucky enough to pick up one of those already. Done in the Lori Holt fabrics. It's really bright and cheerful and really picks you up. And then of course the tried and true Kim Deal fabrics gives it a really cozy, homey feel. So what's really interesting about this pattern is the different look you get depending on the fabrics that you choose and the fun you can have with it. It's very scrappy friendly and lots of fun. The kit that I'm going to be demonstrating today is Pumpkins and Blossoms line. It's a very popular line right now as well. It's fall, but it is so soft and so gentle and is just very calming, I find. So in the kit you get all of the fabrics you need for the top of the runner, including the binding. Okay, the backing is not included, which is the case of most of our kits actually. You will also get what we call the swatch sheet, which gives you the listing of each of the fabrics and what part of the kit they're used in. Okay. And then we usually put a little picture in that says the Quilters Cupboard look. You don't have to always make it to look like this, and certainly with the Tri-Star Table Runner, you have a lot of free reign in how you want your version to look. So that's what I'm going to try and illustrate to you a little bit here today. So you start out with making this table runner. You have 9 different fabrics that make up the stars and the background of the stars. So right here, got 9 different fabrics all mixed up. And if you look at the kit here, the Pumpkins and Blossoms, these are the 9 fabrics, 4 here, 4 here, and 1 here. Okay, so where you put those is really up to you. So you start out with pieces of fabric that are this size, okay, and you cut a 1.5 inch strip off of all 9 fabrics. And that's what I have in front of me here, are these 9 fabrics, 1.5 inch strip of each. That series of fabrics is going to form the center square of your star, okay? So when you go about making this, these strips of fabric into the square, the key is that you really need to have a very accurate 1/4 inch seam, okay? So you have the option when you get these 9 strips cut, you have the option of how you want to mix them up, okay? What I've chosen to do here is I've chosen to put a orange pumpkin in the middle of one set, a dark in the middle of the next set, and a light in the middle of the next set. Okay, so I have sewn these 2 sets together already, being very careful about my 1/4 inch seam. Right now I have pressed the center open in this one, and I have pressed into the center on this one. I may need to adjust my pressing when I get to the next step, okay? But we'll pass that bridge when we get there. So before I move on to sew this, I'm going to talk about what you do now to choose your star points. After you've cut this off, you still have a nice chunk of each of the 9 fabrics. So of these fabrics, you choose which ones you want to be your star points. So for this kit and this sample that I'm making, chosen that these will be the star points. The dark, a plum, and a green, okay? You can see in the samples that we have over here, this one of the stars is green, rust, and then a brownish. Same here, red, blue, and green. With the blues, because they're all blues, just chosen a unique fabric for each of the star points, okay? But this is where, hey, it's all up to you, whatever you want your star points to look like. So for this tiny 3.5 inch square that's going to go in the middle of your star, you want your strips to be very accurately sewn together, as I've mentioned. So I've sewn the first 2 together, and I check at this point to make sure that it is accurately sewn so that I have a total now of 2.5 inches here. So then when I sewed this strip on, I realized this isn't accurate enough, so I actually took it out. So now I'm going to try again. Here we go. Okay, so I have sewn my strip on, I've pressed it, and now I'm going to measure, and yes, it is 3.5 inches wide, and the strip in the center is exactly 1 inch, and that is what is going to make a really nice little 9-patch block for the center of the star. So once we have these 3 made, we cut each unit into 1.5 inch sections. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So as I'm cutting these into the 1.5 inch sections, I'm making sure that I line up the center strip so that there's a line on each side of the center, making sure that I'm getting a very good perpendicular cut. Not about speed, it's about precision. Okay, so now I have 9 sections here, and I just need to mix these up and make them into 3 9-patch blocks. So this is where it gets fun. I like to arrange the blocks before I sew them, taking 1 unit from each of the strip sets and putting them in different positions, just so that you get a different look to each block. And don't worry about this colors being together. That's going to happen in this particular pattern, and it all works together in the end. So there we go. I've chosen to put this little pumpkin one in the middle here, the gray in the middle here, and the darker one in the middle here. I've got a couple of greens together. It's fine. I'm going to take it from here and make these into 9-patch blocks. So when you line these up or put these together to make them into the 9-patch blocks, nesting of the seams is important, and that's going to keep your block nice and square. Okay, so I'm going to put those together. Here I've not got seams that will nest for me, so I'm going to change the pressing direction. On one of the sets so that they will all nest. Now I've got half of my my strips together. I'm going to press this section, just press the seams to one side. So this is where it gets kind of fun for me once I have the blocks partially done. Sometimes I mix them up and I don't end up finishing them the way they started. However, here we are now. I've got different centers in each one, got a mix of fabrics, so I'm happy with it. Is it the same as it was 5 minutes ago? I'm not sure, but it doesn't matter. Now I'm going to put the final strip on. So I have my 9 patches put together, okay, and I have pressed them all open, pressed them flat, I should say. Now I'm going to measure and see if I've achieved a 3.5-inch square. That's looking good. And another good one. Okay, so I have 3.5-inch 9-patch squares, which will make the center of my star block. Okay, so the next step is making the star points. So to do this, you cut the background fabric, which is usually the lightest fabric in the kit or in what you're using. Okay, so your star points consist of this rectangle, 2.5-inch square, and the 2-inch, actually that's a 2-inch square, correction, and 2-inch square for your corners. So the pattern guides you through making the star points, and there's a couple of options here. I've made already the star points for the green and the orange ones, and then I'm going to do these with you. So you take the rectangle, which is 2 by 3.5 inches, and your 2-inch square. The pattern tells you to draw a diagonal line on the back of the square. I have done that with these 4 squares, and I frankly can't see that line very well. I've actually tried a couple of different utensils, and I find that the blue wash away fabric marker actually worked the best. So the pattern tells you to draw a diagonal line across here. Okay, so I've done that by lining up the tip of the ruler, actually not the tip of the ruler, but the tip to the tip of the square and drawing the line. Then you set that on the corner of the rectangle, okay, and that's the line that you're going to be stitching on. Okay, so let's try that. Now another way to do this, because if you're like me, or if you haven't figured out you're like me, but you want to try something different, You can use the easy angle ruler. And this is how I prefer to do my quick corners on my, my flying geese or the star points, okay? You set your square on the rectangle. You've got your easy angle ruler with the black tip at the top. You set that down over the square. Your 2-inch line is here and here. The stitching line is going to be right here, this dotted line on the ruler. Okay, and that's the line that you're going to be stitching on. What I like to do is actually trim this angle, this triangle off right now, okay? So that when I go to the sewing machine, I'm actually using this edge as my guide for my 1/4 inch. So I'm going to do that now. Okay, so here's the one I have done with the easy angle, trimmed it off. Here's the one that I have done by stitching along that drawn line. So now I just trim off the triangle. So achieves the same result. So I'm going to make 4 star points for each of the stars. So it's actually 4 sides to the star, total of 8 points. So here we go, we've got the first half done of these star points / flying geese. Okay, that's the other name for them, of course. So now we're going to press out the flying geese wing. So once you have those all pressed out, you just add the square to the other side of each of the flying geese. I use the easy angle to cut this side as well. Just lay that square on very precisely. I turn the flying geese so that it's vertical. Put down my 2-inch, checking the 2-inch edge here with the black tip overhanging, making sure the dotted line is going corner to corner, and just trim that off. And now I'm going to stitch the rest of the flying geese. Okay, so now I have my star points laid out here. And this is what I have completed earlier with the other stars. So the next step is just to add the background squares onto either side of 2 of the flying geese. This is such a beautiful fabric, tone on tone. Just make sure that you get the right side up. Why? Why do I say that? Well, because I've used my seam ripper already on this little project. So, okay, so I'm just going to add the square corners here, and then we'll put the star together. When you're pressing this section, pattern guides you to press in towards the colored triangle. I'm just going to give these little 9 patches another little press. The wool mat really helps to flatten them. Okay, so now we have our stars ready to be made. This is another little part of the fun. You get to decide where you want each 9 patch to go. So here we go. Here we've got 3 oranges touching the other oranges. I think it looks kind of fun. Same thing here with the greens. Same thing here with the taupes. Maybe we want to change this one up. I kind of like it the other way. You can do your own thing. You can figure out what is most appealing to your eye. Okay, so now you've decided how they're going to go together. So I'm going to add the flying geese onto the side of the 9 patch. Okay, so I'm going to add this, and then I'm going to put this side on, and then I'm going to complete the star. So here we go. So when putting on the first 2 sides of the star points, I was able to stitch right into the center of that X, which has given me a lovely point on each side. So now I've pressed these centers out, okay, towards the star points. These are pressed in, so I have lovely nesting here to put the other sides of the star on. So I'm going to just grab a pin and pin this here so that the nest holds, and pin it here. And then I'm going to stitch directly through this X to give me a nice point on the other side. So this is the first time I've reached for my pin so far in this project. Okay. Okay, I have now the 3 stars done. I have pressed them all open, so they're lying nice and flat. And now the fun continues. Now you get to decide what order you want your stars to be in. You want to follow the pattern or the picture on the Quilter's Cover example, or you can mix it up and do your own thing. So I'm just going to set the stars aside for now, because the next step is making the setting triangles that go around the stars. So if you remember, we started out with 9 fabrics and we chose 3 to be the star points. So the remaining 6 fabrics, we still have a piece about this size left, and we're going to cut a 5.5 inch square out of each of those 6 fabrics. Now, before we cut, I really recommend starching these squares. Mary Ellen's, Flatter, your choice of starch. Just give it a little press afterwards. And the reason I'm starching is because we're going to be cutting the square, and then we're going to be doing diagonal cuts. So there's going to be some bias edges, and we want to make sure that the triangles are stable. I'm going to cut my 5.5-inch square. I have to say, I do enjoy using the Quilter Select ruler that doesn't slip. And I also am a fan of the Quilter Select rotary cutter. To each his own, just thought I would share my preference. I've got the square cut. Now we're going to cut diagonally. So I like to line up the corner here of the ruler and the 45-degree angle line here to get my diagonal cut. And I'm going to do it again. So you will have 6 squares all cut into triangles. And now you mix and match those triangles into 2 triangle units like this. So I have already put a number of them together. And now I'm going to put the ones together that I've just cut with some of the leftovers from the other squares. So you just line up the short sides and stitch down that seam. I'm just going to mention at this time, I don't try to replicate the pattern when it comes to putting these sections together. I just mix and match them because it's very interesting as you play with them and what appeals to you as you lay them out. So just go with the flow a little bit. So once you've sewn these triangles together, you just press to one side. Don't have to be fussy about one side or the other. So you're going to have a total of 12 sets of these triangles. Now, I've talked about how I just like to go with the flow and sew them together, mix and match, see how it turns out. You may absolutely want to draw it all out, make your colored triangles, have everything all mapped out for you before you start putting it together. And that's perfectly fine too. It's really your preference. And that's why this pattern is so much fun, because there are really so many options of how you want to approach it. So now with your stars, you're going to frame each stars with the triangles. So you can start with one and just see how the flow goes. The colors are so soft and so pretty. So that's just laying them down. As I pick them up, I'm going to see about maybe moving this one here and putting this over here, changing it up a little bit. Now you can play with this for a long time to see how you like it. I'm going to go with that as it is now. Okay, so now the next step is to sew these sides on. So I'm just going to turn each of the upper right in. I'm going to take these to the sewing machine, and then I'm going to continue framing each of these blocks. Before I actually start to sew this block, I'm going to make sure that I center this here. So this seam between these triangles should actually be in the center of this flying geese unit. So I'm just going to fold it together, match up my seams there, do a little finger press, and now I'm just going to match that center seam up with the finger press. So I'm going to have a little bit of overhang of the triangle on either end. So when you are putting the sides on your stars, the sitting triangles, a couple of things to watch for. You're wanting to have the star points remain pointy. Okay, mine are not perfect, but they're not bad. I'm satisfied with that. How I achieved the best that I could was I pinned carefully through the X point on this side of the fabric. It's a little tricky to do because your seam allowance is pressed in, so you had to find the X. I had to find the X and then stick the pin through here and stitch close to the point of the pin. Okay, so that's what you're trying to achieve. Once you put the two sides on, press it open. Okay, so this was my, this is my center. I'm going to do the same, putting on these sides. So I'm going to do my finding center of the side. Finger press, match up the seam. I'm going to put one pin in the center there. And now I'm going to look at this side. These sides are easier to actually see where your X is. So if you put your pin down here and then stick it up directly through the X, my X is a little scant here. Don't have quite as much seam allowance available as I would have if I was perfect. Gives you some guidance. Pop this over here now. It's easiest to see those X's if you're stitching on this this side of the unit. Same thing on this side. I'm going to put my pin in through the X. Just add another one on the end here to keep that end of the triangle stable. In through here. And there we go. Sometimes after I get the first square together, I mix and play with the other pieces a little bit. Again, it's all just sort of the, wonder what this might look like if I move this there or whatever. And eventually, probably doesn't end up looking like what you started with. But as long as you're happy with the end result, that's what matters. Yeah, as we get ready to sew these blocks together, square up the squares, just trimming off the dog ears and squaring them up. Just try to leave a 1/4 of an inch from the intersection of the triangles so that you can maintain that nice point at each of the square sections. Okay, so that's the center part of the runner. I'm just going to press it flat now. Press the seams open between the squares, and that will help the binding and not the binding, the border to lay a little bit flatter. When I press seams open, I press to the side first, and then I flip it over and open it up. I find it gives a much smoother press. Okay. At the beginning of the pattern, it told you to cut the inner border and the outer border fabrics. So the inner border is the lighter one, and that was cut at 1 1/4 inches. The outer border is cut at 2 1/2. So we've got 2 strips of each of these. Now, the way I like to approach a border is I measure the long side of whatever my project is. I measure that first. And because this is not very big, I'm going to measure it on both. I'm going to measure it in 2 places. Okay. So I'm measuring that at 27 1/2 inches, but I've started 1 inch in, so I've got 26 1/2 inches in length. And smoothing it out, I've got 26 1/2 inches here too. Now, if I had a bigger project, I'd measure it in 3 places, and I would take the average. So at this point, I need a strip for my long edge of this runner that's 26 1/2 inches long. But I'm not going to cut 26 1/2 inches. I'm going to cut a little bit more than that. I'm going to show you how I do this. Okay. I'm going to put a pin in here a little bit inside of the selvage, and that's going to be the starting point. And I'm going to measure 26.5 inches from there. Now, some people like to use rulers to do this, and that's perfectly fine. You eliminate any risk of stretch or anything if you're using a ruler. I just don't have a long ruler with me here today. So, from here, because I'm in 1 inch here, I'm going to go to my 27.5 inches, which is giving me 26.5 inches between the pins. Now, I'm just going to cut a little bit longer than that. Then I'm going to do the same thing for the other side of the border. The pattern says to measure and cut. If you can choose to cut exactly the length here and then pin it on and sew it. I prefer to, as I'm doing here, cut it a little bit longer. What you don't want to do is you don't want to just take this whole strip, set it up like this, and go to the sewing machine. That's where you run into trouble with wavy borders. Okay. I'm going to fold this in half to find my center. Find my center of the runner. Which should fall right here at this intersection of these two triangles. And I'm going to pin my center. I'm going to take the pin to the end of the runner, match that up, and then pin just inside of that. Now it gets a little tricky here on the inner border because really I would prefer to be stitching on this side of the fabric so I can go through these points. So I am going to now pin on the busy side of the runner where we've got all the seams. I'm going to pay particular attention to pinning where we've got the X's, the intersections that I'm going to try my best not to cut these points off. Okay, so I've got one side pinned and then I'm just going to do exactly the same on the other side. Okay, so I have my borders, inner border sewn on two sides. Now I'm going to press that border out. So once I have my borders pressed out, now I'm going to trim off the excess. Going to line up, straight line along the seam and along the top of the border here. So give it a nice straight cut, smooth along the edge. What I find is if I would have just started stitching from here without leaving this extra, when I press it out, sometimes I would get a curve inward. And that's why I find it works better to leave the extra and trim it off. And have no doubt, I didn't discover this for myself. I've learned this from many other brilliant quilters. Now I'm going to put the ends, the inner border on the ends. So I'm going to, similarly to what I did on the long edges, I'm going to measure from one side to the other side. I'm getting 11 3/4. That's with my 1 inch in here, so I need to cut a piece that's going to be close to that. So because we've got a little bit more distance here, I'm going to actually measure in 3 spots. When I flatten it out, that's 11 3/4. And the same here. So I'm going to measure that distance here between 2 pins. Okay, so I have my end borders sewn on. I'm going to now trim them off again, lining it up nice and square, following lines along here and along the side. There we go. Now I've got one last step, and that's doing the outer border. So I'm going to follow the exact same procedure as I did for the inner border. I'm going to put the long side of the border on first, and then follow that by the short ones. So in just a moment, I will show you the finished product. So when you're measuring and putting on your end pieces, just be very scant in what you leave extra on the ends to trim off. Just be conscious, be aware of how much fabric you can actually get out of each strip. Okay? And here we go. Here is the Pumpkins and Blossoms Tri-Star Table Runner, and the border frames it so beautifully. Skinny border, wider border, and it's all ready now for layering and quilting. This pattern lends itself to a variety of quilting. You can certainly hand quilt it if that is your passion, which I do enjoy doing. You can do some swiggles and wiggles free motion quilting on it. You can do stitch in the ditch, which really makes these little squares pop. You can do a combination of all of that. So you can have fun however you wish with it. Thank you very much for joining me today for the Quilters Cupboards Favorites TriStar Table Runner. Check the link at the bottom of this video to see what kits we currently have available for this pattern. Thank you very much. Bye for now.